Well, welcome again to Hired the Podcast, Travis Miller, and I'm joined today by the fantastic Frank Devine. Frank's the author of the book Rapid Mass Engagement, fantastic book. He is also the founder of the Accelerated Improvement Company, which really helps companies and its employees create and sustain a really high performance culture. Something he's been focusing on for 20, 30 years. Interesting note, just found out the man is a jack of all trades. He also one time unsuccessfully ran for Parliament in the UK and assesses football players for the Football Association of Ireland, not the Irish Football Association, right, Frank?
That's right. Thank you, Jeremy.
So, Frank, rapid mass engagement, that's your thing. That's the program that you have worked for decades to develop.
Yes.
Can you tell me just a bit about the background of exactly what that is, so people have a firm foundation about where you're coming from?
So, first key concept is that it's addressing the difficulty of senior leaders trying to sell a culture or sell continuous improvement or sell high performance to a workforce. When a workforce will, individual employees will have competing interests other than their work in their life, their family, their interests, etc. And this is extremely hard work, and I did it for many years in corporate life. And it came to a point where I thought there must be a better way of doing this. So instead of selling, the idea is that rapidly, and for all of the employees, that's the mass, you create the culture from the bottom up. So if the employees create their own high performance culture, then leadership doesn't have to sell it. Leadership just has to lead in a way that's appropriate and suitable for maintaining that kind of high performance culture from its own employees. So that's the fundamental concept.
Yeah, you talked about that a lot in the book, and I'm curious how you discovered, or what your thoughts are on why the way culture is enacted in almost every organization is leadership sets the culture and tries to establish it within your organization. Why is that something that you found to not work as well or be anywhere near as effective?
If you think about it, organizations have to be hierarchical. You know, somebody has to be responsible for the strategy. Somebody has to be responsible for making sure the organization works well. And the guys at the top believe that they're the people who should decide the culture of the organization. And that's logical and sensible. You know, we want an organization that looks like this, and we're going to articulate what we want it to look like in terms of culture and behaviors. And then we go out and recruit people who have the same values, the same traits that are consistent with what we believe will lead to success. So that's absolutely logical. I did it for many years. It's simply the sheer grinding difficulty of trying to get many, many thousands of employees to all behave in a way that's consistent and aligned, and which brings out the best in everybody else. For example, to be selfless rather than selfish is actually difficult to achieve. I mean, another example, in the work I do, we often call out talking about somebody behind their back. So,
Sure.
So the kind of values would be, if I have a problem with you, I don't talk to your colleagues about you. I don't talk to your boss about you. I go and talk to you. I assume positive intent, assume you're a decent person, and we have a mutually respectful conversation. And at the end of it, we're even better friends than we were before. The opposite of what goes on social media, where perfectly honorable people get a word wrong and somebody wants them fired, kind of thing. So this is looking for the good in people. It's assuming that most people are inherently well-meaning, and there will be some exceptions. But if you approach it that way, and you have robust, competitive performance, so that you're successful in the market. Now, both of those things are important. So Simply going for happiness is disastrous, especially in the private sector. So what you're going for is high performance, which then employees find that they like it. They like being successful. But if you go for happiness as an objective, you become uncompetitive if you've got really, really good competitors.
So you consider happiness more of a byproduct than a goal?
Yeah. Happiness is what you get when you have a high-performing organization with the employees owning their own culture, with removal of barriers to promotion. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, one of the most powerful ways to include people and create diversity is actually to be, like Martin Luther King, colorblind, if you like. Not to categorize people into different races or different groups, or whether they've got degrees, whether they've gone to college or not. Just see them as human beings and look for their strengths, look what they're good at, and then try and mold the organization around what people are good at.
So you mentioned implementing this in organizations with thousands and thousands of people and the difficulty there. I'd imagine there's a dramatically different process and probably different outcomes to do this if you're a 20-person company versus a 200-person company versus a 2,000-person company.
Yeah, the smaller, the easier.
Easier where?
In the smaller ones.
Smaller, the easier?
And let me explain why, In the bigger ones, so the biggest one we've ever done is 3,200 people. Now they have 4,200 because it was successful and they're good people and they've grown the business. But what we have to do to represent that group of people is they have to elect people to go to the decision-making event, the consensus day in the book. And that means that in that particular situation, 100 employees, 90 to 100 employees are deeply, deeply engaged because they've made the decisions as to what the culture is going to be, what the joint change plan is going to be. Now, outside that, you've got 3,100 people who provided the data and made decisions in their individual smaller workshops feeding into this, but they weren't in the room when the decision was made. So at the Last Supper, if you like, there was only so many people there and the rest of the people were outside the room. If you've got a smaller organization, everybody can be in the room at the same time throughout the whole process. So there's a difference between breadth of involvement and engagement and depth. And the guys who make the decisions are deeply, deeply engaged. Like the old one about the bacon and the egg. The chicken's involved, but the pig is deeply engaged. So it's kind of like that. Only they don't die at the end. So we need, in that sense, we need more pigs and fewer chickens. So, yeah.
Well, hopefully the end result is a little bit better for the employees than it was for
exactly. We don't kill them all off at the end.
So you talked about the consensus, Dan. You've already used the word consensus quite a bit here, and I think and
that's important.
And I think when I think about most all hands meetings or strategy sessions or vision sessions or anything, you look for compromise from people, and you've talked about there's a big difference between consensus and compromise.
Yeah, what big difference. I mean, one of the interesting things is there's a guy called Lencioni has written a great book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And one of the 5 dysfunctions is consensus, right? The only trouble is all the examples he gives are compromise. So there is actually a difference between, it's a great book, but I think that the clarity around what's compromise and what's consensus. So to give you an example, some things are just too important for compromise. So we wouldn't say if a murderer had murdered 2 people, if he only murdered 1 person, that'd be okay. Splitting the difference doesn't work very well when it's really important. The other thing about splitting the difference is that nobody's really happy. Mm-hmm. So if you think about a union management negotiation and they reach a compromise, and sometimes that's all you can do. But ultimately, the organization's costs have gone up and the employee's standard of living hasn't gone up as much as they wanted. So nobody's actually happy with the result. With consensus, it takes longer to achieve. It requires a very high level facilitation skills, especially in large groups. And but it's worth it. When it matters enough, it's worth it because of the emotional commitment, but also the quality of the outcomes. When you're compromising between two positions, you've got position A, position B, and then you've got where you end up. When you're seeking consensus, you're innovating, you're creating new ways of doing things, which can be far better than any of those. So you can arrive at something that's better for the company, better for the employees. It's not confined to the gap between position A and position B. It's not along that continuum. It can be better for everyone.
So how do people do that when there's a group of people and one person is firm in their belief that position A is the best position, and another person is firm in their belief that position B is the best position? How do they avoid settling on what's in between and coming together to form position C, which is the best for all?
Yeah. In the original workshops, so the entire workforce is divided into diverse workshops across functions, etc., to avoid groupthink. I set out the stall early on as to why this is at the end is a consensus situation. I'm saying at this stage, the data gathering stage, you're going to make decisions. We won't have time for consensus at this level, but you will be making decisions. You'll be deciding what kind of behaviors do you want in the new organization, if you like. You're going to decide what are the biggest obstacles to achieving where the organization wants to go. And you're going to be electing someone to go to this event, and the rules are going to be consensus. And so the employees understand going into this. They actually mostly think I'm crazy initially, that it's not possible to achieve this. And on the actual consensus day itself, it can often take 4 or 5 hours to get the first consensus agreement. And that's because the guys are learning how to do this. They're learning on the job. And they're not confident yet that it works. So they're very, very cautious. You've got skepticism, you'll have cynicism, you'll have risk aversion, lots of things going on. So it's only when they've successfully seen the value of consensus that then the consensus day starts to build momentum as people, all the mutual respect and listening to other people's positions. And the famous negotiating book, Getting to Yes, there's a lot of moving from people's positions, Fisher and Urey's book, moving from people's positions to their interests and helping people see their interests as part of the facilitation.
So I would imagine that there is a ton of skepticism from team members when this process starts, because if they're bringing you in or trying to implement this, they're probably an organization that has traditionally been top-down leadership. Leadership says this, I want you to implement this, go do it.
Yeah.
And you come in and say, not only will your voice be heard, which most leaders espouse that regardless, not only will your voice be heard, but you will be in charge of making the decisions. And I'd imagine a lot of them just call bullshit.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, absolutely. and one of the interesting things is the what I call the bow wave effect in the book. So the bow wave effect is that the actual exposure to the initial workshops where I'm presenting this and then dealing with what's coming back at me, including the claims of bullshit, and I've had a lot worse than that. It induces what I call reflection. So the example I gave in the book in Boston Scientific, where the canteen staff, the people who provide the food, are contractors, so they're not involved in the mass engagement because they're not employees of Boston Scientific. And we'd only done, I think, from memory, about 8 to 10 workshops. We're doing 3 a day to try and get momentum, 7 days a week. And the manager of the canteen approached me and said, my staff have spoken to me about you, can I have a word? And I'm sitting in the canteen between, and when a woman approaches a man of my age and says, the staff have had a word about you, you tend to catastrophize. So I wondered, what have I done? You know, have I said the wrong thing? And anyway, but she kept a straight face, and then she broadly smiled, and she said, the staff have said, whatever that guy's doing in those workshops, please get him to keep doing it, because the people going through the tills paying for their food are treating us better. So people were making more eye contact. They were being more respectful. They were engaging in conversation. They weren't on their cell phones as much. So that's at the diagnostic stage, where we haven't got to create the culture yet at all. This is your diagnosis. You know, what are the major obstacles? What kind of behaviors do we want? Who are you going to send to where the decisions are made? So the culture hasn't actually been created yet, formally. But informally, the exposure to this kind of methodology and the thinking it induces, and that's why you need very high levels of facilitation. You need people who, I give criteria in the book for the kind of facilitators you need. In order to create that bow wave effect. So the culture goes ahead of the formal process. So things start to change. A group of managers said to me, for example, we talked about this thing about not talking behind people's backs.
Yeah.
And then they had the 360 feedback process. So people would give anonymous feedback to people for their 360 feedback. And when we got into the leadership side, I was showing them about how to give good constructive feedback. So don't talk about someone, talk directly to them. So anyway, they changed the 360 degree, informally. They refused to give anonymous feedback to anyone they hadn't already spoken to. And so therefore the quality of that 360 was so much better, because the recipients didn't have to figure out what's behind this feedback, because they'd already had a conversation about it. Mm-hmm. So that's where the culture is going ahead of the systems within the organization, and the systems are then having to adapt. And that's why one of the barriers if you have functional specialists who are too deeply embedded with their own processes that they've created themselves, which is natural. So I'm an HR director, but I've ripped so many HR policies, in corporate career and afterwards. And I used to say to my guys, we mustn't be precious about what we've created. What we've created is what we think is the best thing, but it has to have exposure to the employees and the managers. And if it doesn't work, we need to design something that works for them, not something that the HR community thinks is good. We've got something that practically moves the dial in the right direction. So there's a lot of kind of disruption there. And sometimes I get resistance because people don't want so much disruption. It's their baby. It might be ugly, but they're going to keep it anyway. Whereas I'd like them to make the baby prettier, if you like.
It's the biggest danger in business. The sentence, it's the way we've always done things.
Yeah, exactly.
So can you walk me through it, Frank? Can you think of any stories about a company that made the decision that said, our culture is broken or needs to be fixed. Frank's our guy. Let's bring him in. What does that look like? Can you think of any specific companies that have taken to it, implemented it really well, and sustained it? And what were the results of that?
Yeah. Okay. The best example of implementation is Boston Scientific.
Okay.
And it wasn't that they thought the organization was broken. It was the highest performing site that they had. But the cultural aspect of it wasn't right. And what they did was they, first of all, reached out to the Shingo Institute, looking at the Shingo Prize methodology. But after about 18 months of benchmarking and trying to find out how to make the cultural side of this work, they came to the conclusion that there's something else missing. The Shingo Institute analysis is saying we need to do these things, but they don't actually know how to do it in practice. And that's how they found me. They kind of stalked me for 18 months, checking in with all my clients and stuff. It was good, a good positive stalking, if you like. And And the issue then was, can we do it with such a big plant? Because at that point, the biggest location that we'd done rapid mass engagement in was a Johnson and Johnson location, which had 650 employees. Going into the 2008 recession, coming out of it, had 1,350 because they were so successful. Johnson and Johnson moved product from China, from the US, from the UK into this location in Ireland, which is actually an expensive place in that sense. It wasn't about cost or tax. It was about quality, all the rest of it. So anyway, the first challenge with the senior guys, the first part of the process is I meet with the senior leaders to talk about what they want to achieve and try and get an indication of what level of engagement you need and enablement of the workforce to achieve what you want to achieve. Because most organizations I come across, their objectives, their goals are very high, but the means to get there are much less ambitious. And unless your means to get there are as powerful and stretching as your goals, you're going to fall short. So I'm analyzing with them there, what do they need compared to what they've got? And then you look at, is rapid mass engagement the right approach? Because there's variations of it depending on the analysis. And in that particular, I call it a diagnostic day. One of the senior guys said to me, can you guarantee that this will work with 3,200 people? And my answer was no, because we've only ever done it for 650. But so, they were expecting me to say, like, be a salesman and say, yeah, of course. But no, I can't guarantee. But I said, well, what we can do is we can predict and prevent. So we can predict
and
what
prevent.
the additional challenges of having such a large group of employees are, and then put mitigation in. So one of the things we did, for example, was make the workshops larger number of people. So we had about 34 people in a workshop. So that meant in any one day, 102 employees would go through the process. Rather than if you had a workshop of 15, which is actually better in some ways because each individual gets more airtime, it would take twice as long. So one of the problems with the rapid part is you do need to get through that process quickly so that people see, it sends a message. When you say to someone, thinking of Coca-Cola plant, you say to people, right, this is the first workshop today. At the end of next week, you'll have a new culture and you'll have created it. So you can imagine that's the message that sends to people. And I ask them sometimes, how long do you wait? If you make a suggestion in your organization, how long do you wait for an answer? And sometimes I get like 6 months. So when you can, or maybe longer sometimes. So when you have something that's so rapid, it sends a message about seriousness of intent. So that's why you have to design it rapidly. So we did that. We predicted, prevented, and then redesigned. And then once you've done that, the individual workshops are where all the employees attend, and they attend not with their colleagues. So you want to avoid groupthink. You want to immediately expose people to how people in other jobs see the world. So you've got this deliberate diversity. And that also means when it comes to who's going to get elected, they're looking at the quality of the person's contribution during the workshop. Because what you don't want, what I say to them is, guys, look, how important is the consensus day? No, it's very important, right? So don't send the village idiot to it, It might be funny, but it's not the right thing to do. Send the best person you think to be there, and the election is interesting in itself. So after that, the way the senior leaders behave matters tremendously. So what we have at the end of each workshop, some of them come in, maybe 3, and they just listen to the outputs of each workshop. So that's socializing some of the issues in the minds of the senior leaders. Oh, we've got a problem I didn't know we have. Oh, lots of people think that's important, because I've heard that now in 7 workshops. So it's kind of how they react to that is important. And obviously I prepare them how to react to that. You don't, this is not the time for debate and discussion. This is a time for understanding, and just understanding what the messages coming back are. And then when all those workshops are finished, we get to the consensus day. So imagine a big circle of people. You've got the senior leaders, and they're the only ones who don't put anything on the agenda. The senior leaders create the scope. They create usually the higher purpose. But how we get to that higher purpose, what the biggest obstacles to getting there, they don't have a say in that. And of course, the employees find this remarkable. So you're saying the only people who don't have a say on the agenda are the senior leadership team. Yeah. And that starts to make them curious. And with curiosity comes receptivity. If you think about a movie and it's going along, and suddenly something unexpected happens. I don't know if you watched Game of Thrones.
I did, and I read that in your book. I thought that was an interesting comparison.
You don't expect the biggest star in the show to have his head cut off at the end of the first. Yeah. So when that happens, people are go, oh, this is interesting, and they want to see the next episode to see what happens. So when you create curiosity, people become open. Then they start to listen more. Maybe this guy's talking sense. Maybe he's not such an idiot. Oh, you wouldn't believe what I've been called in the early stages. And then that opens people up. And the other thing that happens is you get people who've bashed their heads against the wall for years. They've had really good ideas. No one's listened to them. Many employees don't get listened to as well as external consultants. That was one of the reasons why I left corporate life, because I knew people would listen more if they were paying me a lot of money, kind of thing. So what people who previously been quiet or maybe resigned suddenly realize this is an opportunity, and I'm never going to get this opportunity again. So you can imagine what that does to the energy and the passion and the commitment. And what I'm also doing is, through the use of stories, I'm seeding into the culture powerful, emotional stories about events which people can relate to in their own life. So 2 brothers at their mother's funeral, and they'd not reconciled before she died, is a story I tell when I'm getting a lot of cynicism. Because I say, look, if the brothers are cynical, they'll never, and the mother's going to die an unhappy woman. But if one of them has the courage to put their hand out, and I talk that through in a kind of storytelling style, and almost immediately the cynicism in the room, you can see people thinking, people go quiet and they think, I don't want to be the brother who's made their mother die an unhappy woman, kind of thing.
It only takes one.
And that's relating. Yeah. But and you don't get everybody, but what happens is you get enough at the beginning, and then they start to virally infect the others. And some people are uncomfortable with this kind of culture, so they self-select themselves out of the organization. And sometimes there are casualties. The actual culture is so different than before that people who were successful in the old culture now can't make it. But then the other way around, there's a lot more people who are suddenly successful. And the way Boston have done it, I was only speaking to them this morning, 2015, so this is 8 years later. They're fully self-sufficient. They use my materials under license. They have a tremendous group of internal facilitators that I've trained. And that's a great reference site in my view. Now, of course, a senior leader could come in and destroy what's been created. And I give examples in the book of this. So you can't, my vision is to create a culture so powerful that it's impervious to senior leadership changes. That's the vision. But in reality, a destructive enough senior leader can destroy anything.
Sure.
But the issue is to make it as difficult as possible to do that.
So how does a company sustain it? Boston Scientific goes through your entire process, and they come out and they've got this brand new culture and everything's fantastic. What were there tangible results that they attributed to working with you?
Yeah.
And how did they maintain it?
Yeah, well, when you think about tangible results, I'm doing what I do, and the process does what the process does. But individual leaders have to step up to the mark. They have to model and reference. So they have to lead by example and talk about the culture and give examples to help employees join the dots. So one of the great advantages of Consensus Day is you have a large number of employees who become commercially and economically literate, because you're listening to quality people, you're listening to accountants, you're listening to new product development, all in the room, trying to make the best decisions. It's better than most MBAs, I'd say. And they come out into the organization. They now understand when the senior leaders go to bid for investment, so new products coming out corporate, where's corporate going to put it? That's why the senior leaders go and make the case for their factory. You know, it's not like they've goofed off and they're not on the plan. They're doing something, very, very valuable. So the tangible results, there's always a correlation, but causation, it depends on the individual managers, the quality of that. All I can do and the process can do is maximize the probability of increasing things like productivity, quality, all the usual hard metrics that we use in business, but also softer metrics as well. I mean, one of the ones I mentioned in the book is the number of people who are promoted who previously wouldn't have been allowed to apply for jobs, non-college people. That's a really good metric. And it pushes back against the culture of academic inflation and seeing academic intelligence as the only intelligence. And also, in terms of diversity, you're reaching people whose financial family background circumstances made some of the options other people had not viable for them. They had to work. Maybe they were the eldest child in a family and the father died or left or whatever. So they may not have been able to get to college, but they've come up the hard way. So I haven't mentioned it in the book, but there's a recruitment side to this as well, about actually getting the right kind of people in and not being blinded by qualifications and the big company image, because an individual can come up the hard way, not have those opportunities. But if you then give them the opportunities, they can absolutely fly. The question is finding them. And you won't find them usually through the normal recruitment mechanisms. And that's much more powerful in terms of diversity than some of the stuff that's around in terms of what diversity is.
What would you classify as an abnormal recruitment method?
Well, for example, when you have, in order to apply, you need these grades, you're automatically excluding people. Now, I know it's convenient because you exclude a lot of people, but you're kind of reinforcing social privilege from the people who have the most opportunities, if you like, and the most connections. So in my family, I was the first person to ever go to college. I had no clue what it was going to be like, etc., etc. I had no experience. I had an entrepreneurial family background, small construction business with my grandfather, etc., but no understanding of how a big organization works. Now, compared to somebody whose parents are senior managers in an organization and can get them secondments in I'm at a significant disadvantage. And as long as I don't see myself as a victim, as long as I see myself as, okay, that's the way the ball bounced, I have to follow the ball and get away from this idea of being victims. No, we're not victims. It's just there's certain things we need to do to give people a chance to prove what they can do.
I have a question. I'm a tough time wrapping my head around something. So you said this is something that's easier to do in a small
Smaller organization.
But you also said that when you're gathering these groups to form consensus, you want people outside of their normal work circle, not working with their direct colleagues.
Not when you've gathered them. When you're gathering the initial data as to what the most important issues are, you're training the workforce to consider the other function, the other shift,
Sure.
the other guys. That's
Sure.
what you're doing at that stage. By the time we get to consensus day, we make sure every single function, every single shift, every single group of professional people are all in the room together, so that technically you can drive for the best possible decisions.
I just imagine
It's not just about consensus. It's about getting consensus behind decisions that will actually move the dial in a globally competitive environment.
I just imagine.
So there's a hard edge to that.
I just see it being more challenging almost for smaller organizations where there is already so many firmly established relationships and dynamics and preconceived notions.
See what you mean? Yeah.
Versus,
no, I get that.
So how does
I get that.
How do companies handle that?
Well, the only two examples we have of using the direct rather than the indirect, both were very successful. That's all we can say. But with a sample size of 2, that's scientifically not valid. But all we can say is the first 2 have worked very, very well. Mm-hmm. Most of my clients are large, global multinationals, and we're working at local level.
Okay.
So you don't do rapid mass engagement across 5 locations, because the history, the locality, the experience is different, and you're drawing on employees' experience of life as well as work in order to create the culture. So it is local as well as bottom up. Now, corporate people worry. Johnson & Johnson, for example, we have the credo. Will this local culture at the site conflict with our corporate culture, the credo? And theoretically, it's possible. But I put them at ease by saying, if you get a conflict between the two, I'll run naked down the local shops. So I think it's conceptually possible, but extremely unlikely. Because if you look at what's in the credo and you look at good values in work and stuff like that, it's going to be different. It's going to be in local language, and it's going to be their priorities, but there won't be conflict. There'll only be reinforcement and maybe different prioritization because of the local history.
Mm-hmm. One last thing I wanted to talk to you about is you talk about the importance of engaging employees in purposeful work.
Yes.
Now, I would like to think that every leader in every organization believes that what they're doing matters and that the work that their people are doing has purpose. But I am also positive that a lot of leaders are probably not great at communicating what that purpose is. Whose responsibility is that to either find or articulate the real purpose and meaning of the work that people are doing?
Right. So at the level of the system we're trying to improve, so the factory or wherever it is, the office, the first decision-making event with the senior leaders, part of that is me showing them how to, first of all, agree what a higher purpose is, not just a purpose, a higher purpose, and then how to articulate it in normal language that employees would talk to their friends about in the local restaurant or the local pub or whatever. And it's very different from corporate speak or management speak. And I obviously help them draft that. That's part of, it's a joint design thing. So the things you see in the book were created by the organizations, but I was in the room with them. I was helping them put the words together mostly. And the idea is to reach people at deeply emotional levels, the family, the community, things like this, the pride in the local community, creating jobs in the local, or sometimes keeping jobs. If you think about the Rust Belt in the US or any other previously successful industrial areas, which have kind of hollowed out, okay? This kind of approach, if applied into that kind of area, would generate jobs. And now, obviously, you need security, you need other things as well. But if you have jobs, it has a multiplier effect. People don't leave because they've got an opportunity to work in their own community. Well, some will leave, but they leave because they want to rather than because they have to. And when employees realize that you're serious, I don't know if you got to the end of the book about the guy in Becton Dickinson taking out my letter during, yeah. Well, what was happening there was my mother had died the previous November. And in Ireland, there's a tradition of kind of looking after people. So I'm in the UK, she was in Ireland, and total strangers did some lovely things to make the end of her life, her last year, much better than it otherwise would have been. And so I did a letter and in Ireland at that time, especially in Dublin, the capital, the two newspapers would get to about 80% of the people.
Okay.
And so I wrote a letter called The Kindness of Strangers, articulating, it's the last page in the book, the postscript. And the interesting thing about it was February, so 3 months later, we just finished the consensus day and we go to the hotel, some of us, the employees, myself, and we just have a drink. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, we have a drink. And this guy pulls out from his wallet my letter from 3 months ago. And he says, that's you, isn't it, Frank? I said, yeah, of course that's me. He says, how come you've got my letter? And he explained that his job was to stand in for the operators when they needed to go to the bathroom. And he stood in for this operator, and the paper with the letters page with my letter was open. So he looked at it and read it. And then when the operator came back, he said, look, can I have your newspaper when you're finished, And he said, certainly, and he chopped it out and kept it. And then during that, remember you said about the skepticism and the bullshit. So during that period, he got elected from his workshop to go to Consensus Day. But some people were saying, this guy's not serious. I mean, he's not sincere. The company's brought him in. So all this thing about creating jobs, he doesn't give a damn. This thing about reducing emigration from Ireland is, this is all St. Patrick's Day stuff, leprechaun stuff. And he took my letter out to these people and said, read the letter and tell me this guy's not sincere. So when you get, that was just pure luck. And that really helped. But when you get to people at that emotional level, usually they've never experienced that before. It's really big, and they never will again. So enough employees are bright enough to notice that. And that's what gets rid of the cynicism and the skepticism. There will always be some, but enough to make a difference is what happens at the outcomes of this.
Well, Frank, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate it. Your ideas about not only hearing and listening to the people who have chosen to work with your organization, but empowering them to shape the future of the organization is something I wish so many more companies would really take to heart. Frank Devine, author of Rapid Mass Engagement, really appreciate it. If people are interested in hearing more from you or finding out more from you, what's the best way for them to track you down?
Well, the website has articles, and I'll put this podcast on if I get the link and things like that. So email at acceleratedimp@aol.com. That works as well. So and the website as well is there, anything like that. But thank you very much for the opportunity.
My pleasure, Frank. You can find his book on Amazon or anywhere else they can find it.
Yeah, main good bookstores should have the McGraw-Hill are behind the book. They published the book, so wherever you get good McGraw-Hill books, you hopefully find my book.
Fantastic. Big thank you to Noah Cuff, our producer, has been hired the podcast. Thanks so much. See you next time.